everyone. My name is Donna Knapp, and I'd like to welcome you to ITSM Academy's Foundation Review. I'm joined today by Mike Cardinal. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Donna. Hi, everybody.
So this course is designed to help you prepare for your upcoming ITIL Foundation exam or for your upcoming ITIL Intermediate course. We're going to provide a brief introduction to ITIL. We're going to talk about key ITIL concepts, and I want to make sure you understand that we're not going to cover everything that you need to know for your upcoming class. We do encourage everyone to review your full set of foundation notes or at a minimum the glossary of terms. We're also going to talk about the important role that managing organizational change plays in implementing ITIL and do a little bit of a wrap-up. So Mike, what is ITIL?
Well, Donna, that's a great question. And really, simply put, ITIL can be seen as a set of 5 core books that really span the life cycle of a service, along with the complementary publications that provide the flexibility and capabilities that go beyond those 5 core books. Now, you've got to remember that ITIL itself is really used across the world by many organizations and many countries. It really does offer a set of best practice guidance to those organizations for providing those IT services. Now, you might ask, what are best practices? Well, best practices are those activities or processes or steps that we have to follow in order to be successful and can really be used by multiple organizations. In other words, they have been proven. They're vetted and proven across the industries. And those best practices really derive from a set of standards against which any organization can really be certified. A standard such as ISO 20000, really, which is the international standard for IT service management, and helps us sort of derive a set of rules or structures for our best practices. It also consists of things like public frameworks such as ITIL or COVID, Control Objectives in IT, or Microsoft Operations Framework. And each of those offers sort of a different approach to best practice guidance. We can also derive best practices from our own proprietary knowledge. That is, knowledge of individuals or organizations, such as consultants and vendors, who've thought about and worked with some of these best practices and found really the best way to kind of use them and implement them. And we have to remember that using public frameworks and standards really do place an organization at a great advantage, and that's because those best practices give them a common set of practices to follow, a common vocabulary, and it's really not unusual for organizations to pull guidance from a number of these standards, frameworks, and proprietary knowledge in order to achieve the goals that they set for themselves. So it's likely or even probable that your organization's already doing some of these things, and we like to say that in class, that it's not that this should be very new to you. You should already be doing a lot of what service management suggests. You may not just call it service management or follow the particular guidance that ITIL provides to you, but you can then use that guidance to help you see where you need to go, how you need to improve or benchmark your performance, how do you need to find improvement opportunities. So we really do heartily encourage organizations to adopt those best practices and then adapt them to their own specific environments so that they can meet their own needs. So Donna, when it comes to discussing ITIL, you and I really do keep this philosophy together of keep it simple.
Right. And the concept of service management really is comprised of a few key concepts. It is the concept of service management itself, and it's the concept of what services are. So service management is really about putting in place the organizational capabilities that you need to have in order to provide value to your customers in the form of services. Now, this concept of capabilities is important. It really speaks to how capable or how experienced are we as an organization, and how capable are we of being able to meet our customer needs and provide the services that our customers need in the most timely and cost-effective manner possible. So what is a service? Very simply, a service is a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating outcomes. And in this case, we're talking about customer outcomes. We're talking about results that customers want to achieve. So in the context of service management, anyone that is receiving value is a customer. Anyone that is providing value is a service provider. And service providers can come in a number of different shapes and sizes. They can be internal service providers with internal customers, in other words, employees who work for the same organization as the service provider. They may be dedicated to a single business unit within the organization and serve only that business unit, or they may be part of a shared services unit and work along with other business units such as human resources or facilities in order to serve the entire organization. Or they may be external service providers who serve external customers, in other words, customers who are part of a different organization. The key is looking at who your customers are, understanding what your customers value, and then determine how to deliver that value. So, Mike, I talked a little bit about a service being a means of delivering value, but can you explain a little bit more what a service is?
Sure. This picture is a great picture. I love this picture. I also love what you just said about, the customers and focusing on the customers. And I think this picture really shows that really the best way to think of an IT service is really that it's IT, or the technology that you see on the diagram, in support of a business process or activity, in this case something like email. And we have to remember that users really don't in the end care about, or often don't even know about, all of the little parts and pieces and components and systems that make it possible for them to send and receive email. What they really care about is, can I send email? In other words, do I get the end-to-end service that I'm looking for? And they care about that ability to communicate efficiently, communicate effectively, and not have to worry about some of the constraints that necessarily came along with older non-technology supported ways of doing things, such as having to wait for the post office or the post person to deliver your mail, or even the overnight delivery. So we use these IT services in many ways, in many areas of our daily lives, and we may not even realize it. Online banking, printing your boarding pass before a flight, which I as a trainer do a lot of travel. I know you do as well, Donna, and many of the people listening today probably also do. So they should be pretty aware of these kinds of activities that are going on. So the focus, again, and I love how you talked about the customer, right, is about focusing on those outcomes that the customers want to achieve, not about the technology itself. So I love this diagram. Great way to see this. So a question comes to mind, Donna. How do we create these services? How do we go ahead and put this thing in place and make it possible?
Well, we have to have assets. And you may think, you talked about the bits and pieces that we need to deliver email. So it may be tempting to think about assets as only the technical assets. But assets of an organization in the context of service management include capabilities and resources. And capabilities really speak to things like the experience of your management team and how your organization is structured, the maturity of the processes that you have in place, how good you are as an organization at capturing and using knowledge. Resources are consumables. They are things like money and technology, your applications and information. They are things that are used. And we have to have good, strong capabilities in order to transform those resources into services. Now, notice that people are both a capability and a resource. So in the context of capabilities, how experienced are our people? Do they have the right skills? Do they have the right relationships that enable them to get their job done in an efficient and effective manner? And in terms of resources, do we have the right number of people given the demand for our services? So both capabilities and resources are viewed as assets. Service providers have assets, but customers have assets as well. In order to use the services that the service provider is delivering, they've also got to have those experienced or more intangible capabilities, and they've got to be adequately resourced. So we talked about this term capabilities in the context of service management. Capabilities really do reflect that ability of a service provider to coordinate and control and deploy those resources. And it's really what service management is all about. It's really what enables service providers to deliver value. So, Mike, we've been kind of bantying this word value around a little bit. Let's talk about the concept of value.
Wow, Donna, you just have a lot of great questions today, and it's something that you said triggered in me that I'm really glad to know that I am both a capability and a resource as a person. So, that's part of the value that we all add, right? And so, yeah, right. So when we talk about value, we're really talking about two concepts that come together, and those concepts are utility and warranty. Now, from a basic definitional standpoint, we can look at utility as being fit for purpose. And a way I like to think about it is that the right thing or right tool or right service for the job at hand, as opposed to warranty, which is really defined as fit for use. And that is the promise or guarantee that we're making to our customer that the service and the capabilities that we're going to provide to them really do have enough availability, capacity, and continuity and security so that we can actually deliver on those promises. And this diagram, this logic diagram, really helps us to understand how utility and warranty have to come together in order to be able to deliver on that. So why under utility is there an or? Well, some of the constraints that we find are what they are. They can't be removed, and so we may have to look at other ways to be able to provide what the customer needs, that is, enhance their performance. So if I can either enhance their performance or I can remove the constraints, then I can provide that utility they're looking for. Now, utility, though, has to be backed up by warranty. In the end, who cares if you got this great service, it does what you need it to do, but it's not available, and it doesn't have the capacity, or it's not secure when we need it to be secure. So these concepts are really important in terms of warranty, having enough availability, having enough capacity or continuity or security. And these are the things that ultimately, when you put them together, utility and warranty are really valued by the customer, and so they want to define that value in those two terms. Now, having said that, the business has to be willing to fund what they're asking for in terms of those levels of utility and warranty. And I guess maybe what we can think, Donna, is that in the end it comes back to what is it the customers value and what are they willing to pay for that, and that understanding really is part of service strategy, right?
Right. And that really leads us to a little bit of a discussion about the service life cycle. One of the key stages in the service life cycle is service strategy. And service strategy really is about what services should we be offering based on an understanding of what customers are willing to fund, based on an understanding of what customers really value. So the service life cycle, and you can see it illustrated here, represents the 5 core books of ITIL, and it really has a hub and spoke type design. Service strategy is at the hub, or it's the core of the service life cycle. Wrapped around it are the ongoing iterative activities of service design, service transition, service operation. Those are really the stages of the life cycle that represent ongoing change, the ongoing transformation of resources into valuable services. And then continual service improvement surrounds and it supports all of the other stages of the life cycle. Now, it's very important, just like a wagon wheel, all of these stages influence each other. They rely on each other. But having said that, each of them plays a very important role. So, Mike, what are the roles that each of these stages of the life cycle play?
Well, first we have to remember that at its core, each stage really does address how a service provider's capabilities, which you talked about earlier, transforms its resources into those services. So we can kind of think that we're moving through these stages in terms of transformation. So one of the ways that people who know me know that I like to think in word pictures and analogies, and one of the analogies I like to use when talking about each of the stages of the life cycle is kind of a building a house analogy or a house building analogy. So when we want to go and put a new house in place, one of the first things we have to do is think about the fact that we want a new house. And that's really sort of the core of service strategy, is kind of making those decisions to do service management, decide on our strategies, decide on what services we offer, and some of those kind of decisions that have to be made. Once I have that,
you have to figure out what we can afford, right?
Yes, right. So it's the price, it's where's the land going to be, where are we going to build the house. A lot of decision making happens in strategy. A lot of questions get asked and a lot of answers are provided. So you're exactly right. Now, once we move into design, this is kind of like when we're going out and we're hiring an architect or a designer or an interior designer to help us kind of put the picture of the house down on paper and decide how many rooms there should be, where the rooms should be, what colors should go with what kind of capabilities each room should have in terms of electricity or plumbing or lighting or those kind of things. And it goes the same way with the services. It allows us to really sort of design those services, fill in the blanks, and get those blueprints for the services in place. Then we can hand those blueprints over to a general contractor during transition. And during transition, that's kind of like when the general contractor shows up at your site that you've purchased for your house, lays out the land, smooths out the ground, builds a foundation. And we have to remember with service transition that we really have to sort of build the services from the bottom up. During strategy and design, we kind of started from the top down and designed things from the top down. But when we actually go to build that service and build that house, we have to build that foundation first, and then we can frame above it. Once the house is built, then we have to live in it. And that's kind of service operations. And we have to deal with all of the things that go along with having a house. Broken plumbing, pipes bursting, things not working the way that they're supposed to work, your electricity going out, floods, all of those things that we have to deal with. And that's kind of like what happens with incident management and problem management, where we have to deal with the kind of situations that come to us. And then perhaps in the future we may decide we want to expand the house or add on to the house or add a deck or change the landscaping or do all those other type of things that make the house more livable. Well, that's continual service improvement. So during CSI, we're really looking at our services, looking at our processes, looking at our functions and our capabilities and resources and saying, how can we do this better? Are there ways that we can improve that? And in the end, we can take that improvement and then cycle it back through all of the stages of the life cycle to get that complete picture that you were talking about in terms of the hub and spoke.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind that, Mike, when you're kind of talking through these stages, it leaves the impression a little bit that they're linear, that you start with service strategy and you end with continual service improvement, but that's not the case at all. There really is no end. There is no finish line. Each stage of the life cycle provides an output or a deliverable of some kind to every other stage of the life cycle. Each stage of the life cycle provides feedback and lessons learned to all of the other stages of the life cycle. Continual service improvement is always there, helping to take those lessons learned and turn them into improvement opportunities. One of the fundamental premises within continual service improvement is plan, do, check, act. So we're always looking at, all right, what lessons have we learned? Where are there opportunities for improvement? Let's make those changes. Let's check and see, did we receive the benefits that we want to? And, then move on from there. But Mike, let me ask you the $1,000,000 question. Where do we begin in all of this?
Well, I always like to think of that wonderful movie called The Wizard of Oz. And Dorothy's trying to return back home, and so she talks to the good witch Glinda about how do I get to the Emerald City, and the good witch says to her, well, it's always best to begin at the beginning. And so that becomes really where we want to start. And looking at the life cycle, what we see is that the life cycle is a circle, and so it doesn't really have so much a beginning and an end as a continual cycle. And so what we have to do is really, sometimes it's best to begin at the end rather than truly at the beginning. And in this case, the end is continual service improvement in a sense. And so beginning with a mindset of continual service improvement leads us into that yellow brick road. And I know you always talk about that too, that analogy of the Wizard of Oz and how appropriate it is to the journey that we're going to take with service management. And so this continual service improvement approach of asking, what is our vision? Where are we now? So we have sort of a comparison of our as-is and our to-be states. Where do we want to be? What are the long-term milestones or goalposts that we want to hit along the journey? How do we get there? What are the vehicles that we want to use? What are the improvements we need to make to get there? And then, are we there yet? So did we achieve what we're looking for? And measurements and metrics help us to see that. Now, I think the hardest question, though, right, Donna, is how do we keep that whole thing going? That's got to be a tough question to answer.
It absolutely is. It's one of those questions where you have to constantly look at, and again, we're under pressure in organizations always to undertake a project and then kind of call it done and move on to the next project. So with IT service management, we really always have to be looking at, short-term, mid-term, long-term plans so that we've always got some type of iterative ongoing improvement. Show proof of concept. Get out there and celebrate accomplishments. Make sure that especially senior management is aware of all the good that is coming out of the improvements. Also, a really important part of keeping the momentum going is identifying change champions. And you all, now that you're having the opportunity to learn more about ITIL, are change champions. You have the ability to kind of get out there and talk to other people about what you're learning and how ITIL can benefit your organization. Now, one of the steps Mike talked about is how do we get there? And how we get there is through service and process improvement. And by also looking at the functions and the processes that we have in place within our organization, the technologies we have in place, and make sure that they truly are benefiting our organizations. So I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about this concept of functions. Functions are the teams or the groups of people that we have within an organization that perform certain types of work, and they're responsible for very specific outcomes. So an example of a function in ITIL is the service desk, and the service desk is really the first point of contact for customers, and they're really ultimately responsible for customer satisfaction. The other functions that we learn about in ITIL include technical management and application management. Technical management being, the network group, the desktop group, all the different, various technical teams, the security folks that are involved in maintaining the infrastructure, and IT operations management. Now, these functions take on roles similar to what you would experience in a restaurant, for example. The service desk plays very much a front of the house role. So again, it's that single point of contact for users. If you need to report an incident, if you want to submit a request, you go to the service desk, and the service desk then engages these other back of the house functions like technical management and application management. Think about it. If you walked into a restaurant, you wouldn't walk into the kitchen and talk personally to the chef about how they're preparing your meal. You'd probably get shooed out of that kitchen very, very quickly if you tried to do that. So similar.
I know I would.
You're right. Yeah, similar concept here. We have our service desk as the front of the house. Our technical and application management folks are focusing on projects, and they're focusing on resolving incidents and actually executing requests. IT operations management has two distinct roles. IT operations control, and this is kind of sort of the traditional data center. These are the folks who are handling, print activities and console activities, scheduling jobs. And then you've got facilities management who's handling the actual physical environment that supports our IT infrastructure. But Mike, these functions, it makes sense to have these functions. It makes sense to have these specialized teams of people who are working together and have clear roles and responsibilities. But we can run into some challenges with functions, can't we?
Oh, we certainly can, because you can really end up having these functions operate in silos, not talking to each other, not working with each other, and that can be just as detrimental to your organization as not having the functions at all. So really the question comes down to, how do we overcome those challenges? And I think the best way to think of it, and ITIL suggests this, is use process, right? Because processes help you to cut across these functions, getting them working together, focusing on common objectives. And so when we think about processes, I always like to think of functions use processes that cut across these various application management, technical management, service desk, and operations management functions, and can overcome some of those challenges. So let's take a look at what ITIL says about the processes. You'll notice here, I love this diagram, what I refer to as the waterfall diagram. It's a great way to kind of take a big picture view of the processes. Now remember what Donna talked about in terms of processes, sets of steps or activities that we have to follow to achieve certain outcomes. So the way this diagram kind of works and explains the processes is each of the columns represents one of the stages or one of the publications or books of the life cycle, and you can see them there: strategy, design, transition, operation, and CSI. The rows represent the processes within those, and the way that those work is every process has to have a home, right? Everything in its place, a place for everything. And so we can place each of those processes from ITIL in one of these stages as its primary home. And the way I like to think about that is, say, service portfolio or business relationship management or financial. What that means is the bulk of their work or their activity, the focus of their activity occurs during that service strategy stage, but they really do sort of cut across all of the life cycle. And so even though we may put the portfolio together initially during strategy, it really does carry an influence all the way across the life cycle. And we can see that in other places with supplier management, with change management. So change management really does begin long before service transition. It may begin as early as be involved as early as service strategy. And so we can look at each of these stages as being a set of processes as well. And you can see part of why this is known as the waterfall diagram is because with every process and every stage you have inputs and outputs. And so the outputs of the service strategy stage really become the inputs to service design. The inputs or the outputs of service design become the inputs to transition until you get down to the seven-step improvement process, which really acts sort of as this pump that brings the feedback up. And Donna did a great job of showing you how the processes are not sort of one after another, the stages are not one after another, but they sort of cycle on each other. And so this diagram reinforces that. So we're talking about this idea of a process, but can you really, Donna, can you explain a little bit more for our listeners?
Sure. And I'm going to recap, some of the points that Mike made. By definition, a process is a structured set of activities. Now think back to that grid that Mike just talked about. I like to say that with a process, you put a box around a set of activities. So you say, all right, we're going to call this set of activities incident management, or we're going to call this set of activities problem management. Every process takes inputs and produces outputs, but also every process has a customer. So that customer receives the results of the process and is ultimately going to determine, based on the feedback that they provide. Processes are closed-loop systems in this respect. They take feedback from customers and they use that feedback to determine whether or not the process is functioning efficiently and effectively. So every process has to have a customer. Every process has to have a defined trigger, some event or some action that lets us know, okay, we're starting this process. We're now going to begin this set of activities. Processes also have to have defined as part of the process all of the roles and responsibilities and tools and management controls or rules, so to speak, that you have to have in place in order to execute that process. I know sometimes when we think about this term process, some of you may in fact be seeing a Visio flowchart in your head, but that Visio flowchart is only one small part of the process. All of these other components have to come into play in order to have that process clearly defined. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that a process includes all of the roles and responsibilities associated with that process. Think of a role as a hat that somebody wears. And you, in the course of doing your work, probably wear many hats, and you change your hats throughout the day based on what process you are involved in at any given point in time. So don't think of a role as a job description, so to speak. Think of it more, again, as a hat that you wear within the boundaries of a particular process. So, Mike, let's bring all these concepts together.
Sure, great, yeah. Really what we can do is step back from all of these definitions that we just talked about and see that what we have is a way to see all of these things working together. So let's take incident management really as an example. And we start with this idea that incident management resides within the service operation lifecycle stage, and we have this process, this set of activities that Donna just described, called incident management, the box around the steps, as it were. Associated to that are a number of roles. And, I love that analogy of wearing the hat, Donna. I love wearing hats myself, so I think I could fill roles really, really well because I like wearing hats, right? It's a good thing. But, for ITIL, the kind of roles that we're talking about, the kind of hats that we're talking about are things like process owner, who owns that overall process, process managers, incident owner, who may own the single incidents, first and second line support. There can be any number of these roles, and you've got to kind of look at which roles are needed for your particular process. And then we have to look that those roles may work in multiple functions. They may work in one function. We may even be able to combine roles into single individuals. So we've got a lot of flexibility here. Now, in terms of working in the various functions, I could have that single person being an incident owner working just in the service desk, or I could have second line support that actually, those people that fill that role could work in both technical management and application management. So basing on our just key definitions that we've provided you, we can see there's a lot of flexibility in how we're going to adopt and adapt to make this stuff work. So, we've got this stuff in place, Donna, right? We've got our stages, we've got our processes, our roles and functions, but how do we make all this stuff go the best way possible? How do we make it as efficient and effective as it can be?
Well, Mike, we work in IT, so we've come to the part of the section that the IT people like to talk about most. Certainly,
good.
Certainly, technology is a consideration here, but notice that we're talking about this towards the end. Technology absolutely plays an important role. It really can support every stage of the life cycle. There are technologies that enable you to integrate multiple service management processes. They're very often referred to as product suites or enterprise suites. There are also tools that are targeted at very specific life cycle stages. So service transition, for example, you've got deployment technologies, or you've got discovery technologies that enable you to populate your configuration management databases. So it really can benefit every stage of the life cycle, every process. There are very few organizations today, it's maybe the very smallest organizations that don't reap benefits from some type of technology. But Mike, I like to say that if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster, right?
Oh yeah, I love that, Donna. I love that statement. It just kind of sums things up. And the way I like to think about the relationship between tools and services and processes is no tools before the rules. So we have to remember that those processes really need to come first. Otherwise, you end up letting, say, the tool vendor define your processes or your way of doing things instead of you having the processes with the tool that enables it, as Donna just described. So how are we going to be able to do this? Well, first of all, start simple, right? Start by defining or simplifying your processes. Take those processes, look at each activity within that process, and determine how could technology support this and what technologies might be able to support it. And remember that sometimes it's going to be that particular tools won't be able to support an entire process as you got it designed. So sometimes you have to look at the tools and understand, okay, I've got this tool, it won't do the process as I've got it designed. So maybe I need to tweak it. Maybe I need to make some subtle changes or some small changes. But, we always say be careful because of what Donna said, right? If you're going to throw that tool in there, it may not get you what you're looking for. So it's always really important, too, when we're trying to pick out the right tool, we've got to think about that even though it's the functionality of that tool that really is the wow factor, the part that really attracts us to the tool, we also have to make sure that underneath the hood that the tool's going to do what we need it to do. It's going to perform according to the needed requirements in terms of non-functionality, or sometimes you can think of that sort of as warranty or in terms of warranty. So make sure that you're looking at both those functional and non-functional requirements when you're choosing the tool. And, overall, we always want to keep people thinking about the fact that it's always important to keep in mind, technology isn't necessarily going to be a magic pill. Sometimes we have to think about the people side of service management. We haven't really talked about the people side yet, Don. We talked about processes and we talked about functions so much, but what about the people? Can you talk to us about the people?
I can, and it's really a critical component here. Implementing ITIL, or IT service management, is really culture change in its absolute purest form. So to be successful, you really have to understand the characteristics of organizational change and manage that organizational change. You need to know that when you're changing your processes within your organization by using best practices from a framework like ITIL, you're not just changing those processes. You're changing the roles that people play. You're maybe changing the functions within which they reside. You're implementing maybe new technologies. Very often, as your processes mature, the management style that you have in place within your organization is going to change. You're going to maybe move from having a very reactive culture to more of a proactive culture. So organizational change management is really about preparing people and equipping people and motivating people to accept the change and to embrace that change. We are, as human beings, we have this tendency to resist change. Even good changes that are coming our way, sometimes we have a tendency to resist. So part of what organizational change management, part of what it does is help us gain commitment for the change, so break down some of that resistance, and really put in place the communication mechanisms that we need to put in place to make sure everybody knows what's going on. One of the things that one of the reasons why I think people resist change sometimes is because they feel like it's being done to them. So we really do want to make sure that the changes we're making are for people and with people, that people are actively engaged and understand why we're making the changes. And again, that they don't feel that these changes are being made to them. So each of you plays a very important role. Now that you're learning more about ITIL, you're learning about IT service management and organizational change, we encourage each and every one of you to be a change champion. Get out there and share what you're learning. Really think about, how can I apply what I'm learning to my organization? What best practices can we use to improve the way we're doing things? And sometimes just baby steps are good enough, right? To just think about plan, do, check, act, make those little incremental improvements. So we encourage each and every one of you to be a change champion.
So yeah, Donna, I'm one of those people. I don't necessarily like change being done to me. I'd rather have it done with me and for me. So very good points. So let's kind of summarize and recap here, right? So first of all, when doing service management, our best idea that we can bring to the table is keep it simple. Remember that ITIL is really a set of best practices for IT service management. The core concepts of IT service management reside in a service lifecycle that is built around 5 stages covered in the 5 books of ITIL: service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, and continual service improvement. And it really doesn't take a lot of complex thinking to really get a handle around what service management can do for you and what it's all about. So we've got these key concepts of services, functions, processes, and technologies. Remember, services support our business processes and are really the means of delivering value to customers. Functions are those teams or groups of people within an organization that are really specialized to perform certain types of work and are responsible for those outcomes to be delivered. Processes, well-defined processes, really help us improve productivity by giving us steps and activities to follow, and they help us cut across those functions to be able to work together. And technology is an enabler. In and itself, it is not the goal. It's really a means to the end of delivering value. And so we have to remember, the goal of all of this is you got to do this for the business, for the customer. We have to begin with this understanding of business requirements and a strong focus on OCM. And remember, as Donna just talked about, you can't do this without the people. So people are really, really important to this.
Okay.
So, everybody, congratulations on making it through with us on these efforts to prepare for your great classroom experience. It's going to be meaningful to you. It's going to give you a lot of value. We know that. So also, I want to remind you, as Donna said right up front, don't think necessarily that this is all you need to know, right? This is an overview, a review of what we think are the key concepts that you have to keep in mind as you go through class. And remember to, look at your foundation notes if you're sort of at that intermediate level, or at a minimum, perhaps looking at that foundation glossary of terms, just to kind of get that review, those terms back in your mind. And as always, if you have questions about any of this, go ahead, feel free to reach out to us using the contact information provided in your welcome email. And really in the end, Donna, I've had a great time. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff. Have you?
I did as well, and I second you, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate the time.